Hello, my name is Dr. Siobhan Hugh-Jones. I'm a lecturer in psychology and the current admissions tutor in the Institute of Psychological Sciences at the University of Leeds. Coming to university is a fantastic experience, an opportunity to learn, develop, to be challenged and inspired. But knowing for sure what you want to study at university can be challenging, if not extremely stressful. This podcast is here to help you if you are thinking about studying psychology. It will explain what psychology is, what it is like to study psychology at university, how it is taught and assessed, and the career opportunities available to psychology graduates. At the end, I'll say a little about applying to study psychology at university. Psychology is an exciting and intriguing subject, yet it has been plagued by misrepresentation in the media and in the lay population. Just think of Paul McKenna and Supernanny and books like Games People Play, all you need to know about human relationships apparently. So getting a clear understanding of how psychologists define psychology is a must for any student considering studying psychology at university. Psychology is a scientific study of mind and behaviour. The human mind and human behaviour are extraordinarily complex. As psychologists, we want to be able to explain how and why certain behaviours, emotions, or internal processes happen. Psychology therefore largely functions as a science subject, meaning that it is based on research principles that will produce valid and reliable information. Psychologists formulate hypotheses, design studies, collect data, analyse outcomes and interpret findings. Part of becoming a good psychologist is becoming a good researcher, or at least someone who is able to judge the quality of research done by others. So you'll find that a significant part of any undergraduate psychology degree is concerned with teaching you the skills required to become a good researcher. Psychology is a broad-ranging, dynamic and purposeful discipline. It covers every aspect of human behaviour and the processes underlying it. As a subject, it is very dynamic. It's alive, forward-moving and very active in the UK and internationally. Controversies and amazing findings are always emerging. Finally, in being purposeful, it seeks to answer specific questions that matter and have use to human well-being. Given that psychology is a science concerned with generating the best and most comprehensive explanations for complex human behaviour, we must consider multiple levels of explanation and how these may interact. So we study possible explanations from the level of the cell through to the level of community. This means that as an undergraduate student of psychology, you would have to engage with research on genetics, how much of our behaviour is determined by our genes, for example, and hormones, how do they influence behaviour, like aggression and sexual behaviour? What about brain function? Which parts of the brain are responsible for certain behaviours, and what can we understand about how they operate? Perception. How do we make sense of all the information we receive about our world as we go about in it? Intelligence. Is there such a thing? Are there multiple forms of intelligence? How can we measure them? Emotions and cognitions, or thoughts and feelings. Are all human behaviours fundamentally driven by emotion? What is the relationship between thoughts and feelings? How can we explain humans' amazing powers for high-level thoughts? Memory. We could not function without remembering where we are, who we are, and what we're doing. How does memory work? Is it reliable? How can we model it? Personality. What is the structure of personality? Is it alterable? And what about interpersonal factors? As humans, we operate in relation to ourselves and to others at all times. How influential are relationships on behaviour? Why do we function differently in groups? How do societies evolve rules for behaviour? This list is not in any way exhaustive, so you can see how broad-ranging psychology is. Psychology is a highly engaging, fascinating discipline that not only explains human behaviour, but studies it in a way that we can address real-world problems. Studying psychology at university may require you to think about how we apply psychological research in this way. Here's an example of the different levels at which psychology could examine human behaviour in a way that has direct relevance. and it shows how as psychologists we need to think holistically about human behaviour. The obesity epidemic continues to be a problem both in the UK and internationally, despite the fact that people have better access to good food and greater knowledge about what we should and should not be eating. Both the government and the media send out endless messages about what a healthy diet is and the dangers of not eating well. Such dangers include heart disease, cancer, diabetes, as well as significant effects on one's capacity to function and one's self-esteem. Yet many people continue to eat in a way that is contrary to healthy eating advice. This intrigues psychologists, and we see it across a range of behaviours. Why do we sunbathe without sunscreen? Why do we drive without seatbelts? Why do we binge drink and smoke? Why don't we go to the GP when we should? In other words, why do we do things that are bad for us? Psychologists would address this kind of real-world problem from many different angles. As shown here, when considering poor eating habits, we might consider biological, personal, social and contextual factors that explain poor eating. Good psychologists are always sensitive to the fact that multiple factors must be considered when we attempt to account for any given behaviour. Part of a psychologist's job is to learn which factors may be responsible for particular aspects of a behaviour and how these may interact. So taking this example of bad eating habit, let's look at the different factors that psychologists would consider. For biological factors, we would consider genetic factors. Is our size genetically predetermined? What about in utero experiences? Does it matter what mothers eat when they are pregnant? What about taste perception? We know that there are differences between people in their sensitivity to taste. Does this shape what people eat? What about recognition of signals of hunger and fullness? Are these different among people? Are some people more willing to override them than others? In thinking about personal and social factors, we would consider learned behaviours. Given that most of our eating habits are established in childhood, how does this learning happen, and is it alterable? What about personal preferences? How are they established and maintained? Peer pressure. How influential are others on what we eat? We would consider the social nature of eating. It's a highly sociable activity. What social practices makes obesity more likely? What does our diet say about us? What does it say about identity? And finally, why is it so difficult to change people's behaviour? In considering contextual factors, we would remember that we all live within systems, so we must pay attention to these when we're trying to explain any given behaviour. In relation to food, we might consider the meaning that food has to particular cultures, how available good or junk food is to people, the influence of advertising and the pressures of time. As psychologists, we would research each of these different areas of possible influence, utilising appropriate and rigorous ways of studying human behaviour, be that experimental, observational, epidemiological, or case studies and interviews. So we can see there's multiple layers of thinking in operation across many areas of psychology. For example, in my own area of interest, developmental psychology, we could take the example of research into ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. It is the most commonly diagnosed psychiatric disorder in childhood. So again, we would look at biological factors. Is it influenced by genes? What about toxins or trauma exposed in utero? Are there neurological deficits or areas of the brain involved in what we call executive function that regulate behaviour and involve memory, thinking, planning and organising? And what about the influence of diet? We would also consider personal and social factors. Is ADHD a result of certain temperaments? What about hostility in families, maltreatment or deprivation? What are its links to low socioeconomic class? We would also consider contextual factors. Are the expectations in schools the problem, or the labelling that we do of people's behaviour? Or is it a problem at societal level with regards to tolerance of children's behaviour? So as psychologists, overall we work to understand the nature and effects of differing factors on behaviour, how these interact and under what conditions, the most robust methods of scientific inquiry, and how to implement findings to the best effect.